All right, so welcome everyone to Keyfest 2022. My name is Andrew Yang. I'm the Client Services Manager here at Casa. This is our second year running back Keyfest, and today I'm super excited to host this awesome Lightning Privacy panel. And joining me today, I have Lisa. She is a Lightning Protocol developer at Blockstream. She's joined by another panelist, Ginger, who is the Chief Security Officer of her home as well. We have Nadav. He is a software engineer at Suredbits. And we also have Anthony, who's also a software engineer at Impervious. So why don't we just get straight into it? We have the first topic I wanted to talk about was just privacy in general on Bitcoin. And maybe we can talk about what privacy looks like on Lightning and what privacy looks like on chain and what are some of the trade-offs. Would anybody like to take a stab at that first?
Yeah, it's kind of a huge topic, especially if you go into explaining like on-chain stuff. Like essentially like the way I kind of look at it, because as we start diving into Lightning privacy stuff, some of it can seem pretty damning, but for the most part, like when you're doing a transaction on chain, like you're pretty much broadcasting that to the entire world. And once that gets mined, it's pretty much set in stone, and you can see that forever. But with Lightning itself, you can achieve a lot better privacy. Like nothing's set in stone. So like you're sending payments back and forth, and there's a limited amount of people that can even see that is happening at all. A subset of the network, but for the most part, like they don't have as much information about where it's coming from, it's where it's going and things like that. So like once you shut off your node, it's all there's a limited on-chain footprint that is seen, but it's a lot better privacy wise than on-chain, where every time you make a transaction or you put your Bitcoin address out there and everyone in the world can see that. So yeah, I would just like kind of preface a lot of this with like, it is better than just naively using on-chain, but there are some privacy trade-offs with Lightning as well. And I'm not sure how much more you want to dive into that, but that's kind of just my preface.
Yeah, and in particular, like kind of if you just took a snapshot of like say Bitcoin or a snapshot of the Lightning network, then kind of the amount of information you could get from the on-chain information, say that like a couple of addresses or UTXOs belong to someone or did belong to someone, then you can kind of learn a lot about other transaction activity that they've had since then or before then, and that the people around them have had and these kinds of things. And on the Lightning network, it is harder to get that kind of information passively.
Yeah, and so for people in our audience, when we talk about on-chain transactions, that's like a normal Bitcoin transaction that you would send from a Casa multi-sig wallet or another hardware wallet. That's what we meant. It's like when you put in a Bitcoin address into a wallet and you send Bitcoin there, that's an on-chain transaction. A Lightning transaction is a little bit different. These Lightning payments often are facilitated through invoices or QR codes, and where, the recipient typically has to specify an amount that they want to receive before payment. And the differences between the two is that on-chain, they typically get confirmed within 10 minutes, but a Lightning transactions get confirmed instantly. So I guess one of my questions, maybe for you, Lisa, is we've talked about on-chain privacy and that these transactions are in the public, that anybody can see. How is it that somebody who's observing on-chain transactions, how is it that they might be able to figure out who you are as an individual based off of the on-chain footprint?
Yeah, so my understanding of this is like the sort of people who do chain analytics, right? So my understanding of this probably isn't the most sophisticated, but I think the high level is that because of the way that Bitcoin transactions are generally chained together, so you make one Bitcoin transaction and then you have a new balance, and then you take that like new transaction and kind of roll it into the next transaction. So every transaction that you're making on Bitcoin, you kind of create this chain that you can then follow like from one hop to the next to the next. So when it's all on chain, it's really easy to see those chain linkages, little hop to hop to hop of where money moved around. It gets published into the blockchain and becomes public record, right? So then the whole goal or the problem then is you create this kind of like network of money that you've sent and received to different people. If at any point you send that money to any sort of service that then knows what your identity is for that one transaction that you send them, that then gives them the ability to go look at this public data that's got like the entire like hop to hop to hop of all the past transactions you've made with any money associated with the money that you sent to that exchange, for example. And so that's like basically kind of how you can have this whole really good, like kind of like been super secure and careful about who you tell what coins you own. And then you make one transaction where you send coins on chain to a party that then can figure out your identity. Maybe that's, like I said, an exchange that has the know your customers called KYC rules. That gives them all of a sudden this like retroactive ability to see past history, as it's all written on chain. I think that's a really big difference between the on-chain stuff and Lightning stuff. And the reason that that is that way is that like we talked about, like when you make a transaction with Bitcoin on chain, that means that the transaction gets written into the global ledger that everyone can see. It becomes public, right? So the difference between Lightning and Bitcoin is that when you make a transaction on Lightning, the only parties that know about that transaction are the ones that helps you make it. It's ephemeral. So after that transaction has been processed, so to speak. So if I wanted to send money to Anthony, for example, if I send him money on chain, that record it would be like Lisa is sending like 2 Bitcoin or whatever to Anthony. That's kind of like the transaction data, right? So on-chain transaction, you write that into the chain. It becomes semi-public record. If people can figure out which one is Lisa and which one is Anthony, then they'll know forever that we made that transaction. Whereas on Lightning, if I write a little invoice, so in Lightning, we make transactions via invoices. I would write an invoice. It's like, I'm going to pay, 2 Bitcoin to this node, which Anthony owns. The only people that see kind of like that payment data of even where it starts and where it ends is really only the person who creates the route from my node to Anthony's node. So Anthony won't know like where my funds are originating from based on the way that transactions get sent in the Lightning network. The only person that sees the full route of it is the person who builds the route that we're going to send the payment on. So they know what the destination is and they know where the originating node is. And the reason that Lightning is like that is that the way that we send transactions is like a lot more ephemeral. It's kind of just written in a bunch of people's like books, sort of like off the chain, and sort of like kind of like roll up all the data. Eventually that'll get committed to chain. But in the meantime, we're kind of just like keeping track in like little paper napkins, so to speak, of who owes who what. Anyways, so like the way that the payment, so that transaction data is sent, is very similar to is actually identical to how the Tor network sends packets. And if you know anything about how the Tor network works, the only information, so if I have a message and I want to send it to Andrew, but I'm going to send it first I'm the router, so I know I'm designing the route. So I know that I'm going to send my Lightning payment to Nadav, then to Anthony, and then Anthony's going to send it to Andrew. The only information that Nadav and Anthony have about that payment is Nadav will know that it came from me and then he's sending it to Anthony, but he doesn't know who it's going to after Anthony. Anthony will know that it came from Nadav and that it's going to Andrew, but has no idea where it came from before it got to Nadav, right? And so Tor packets work exactly the same way. That's how Lightning Network payments, like transactions, work. I can send something to Andrew through Nadav and Anthony, and they won't have any idea about the origination of that payment or what the final destination is. They know who the previous hop is and the next hop is. Anyways. And then once that transaction has been routed through them, unless they're keeping track of what payments they've gotten and where they've gotten them from and where they've sent them to, let's assume they're like throwing away all that intermediate payment data. At the end of the day, Nadav won't have any idea that he helped me send money to Andrew. Even if he is saving the data, but it's not written anywhere publicly. It's not like Anthony could go through and see all the payments that Nadav has routed or that have touched Nadav, because we don't make that public information. Only the people that were on the route that I made to send the payment know that the payment existed at all, which is very different than on-chain payments. I've talked a lot. I don't know if I've like gotten totally off track at this point, but that's kind of, I think, a good understanding of how transactions, the differes.
Yeah, I think a quick summary is that you're going to send me 2 Bitcoin as a test transactions. No, but no,
I hope
that's
you
really
like reg test coins.
Yeah, testnet Bitcoin, sure. No, I think that's super enlightening, because we've talked about on-chain transactions. That's like your basic transactions that you send from your Bitcoin wallet. These Lightning transactions are often called off-chain transactions. And the reason why it's off-chain is because these transactions happen outside of the Bitcoin blockchain. And so they're not exactly observable. With that being said, it sounds like to me that for making day-to-day transactions, maybe Lightning is more private than on-chain, because we're not necessarily leaving or information inside the Bitcoin blockchain about like who we are, how much we're sending, and all that kind of stuff. But that being said, Chainalysis recently released a blog post saying that they're going to offer monitoring capabilities on the Lightning Network for AML KYC purposes. So does anybody want to talk about like how are you guys reacting to this story? Is it possible? If so, like what potential strategies might they be using?
Yeah. Earlier last year, I wrote an article on Lightning Network privacy, and the whole inspiration for it was the fact that I knew Lightning analysis was happening based on my own experiences in the field. And I wanted people to be aware of every which way which they could be like doxxed or have their privacy leaked. And came out with that article, and it was funny because Chainalysis, they were even liking it and retweeting it themselves. And I was like, well, I hope I didn't help them figure this out. And lo and behold, 6 months later, here they are with this. I didn't feel so bad though, because it was already happening in the field. There's already been quite a few custodians using Lightning, and regulated custodians using Lightning. And of course, you can assume that they are doing some sort of analysis behind the scenes. So it wasn't a surprise to me that they would do it. But it's also probably not the most the lowest hanging fruit, I think. So if we take everything that Lisa said about like UTXOs and monitoring the history of transactions and addresses and the way which transactions flow through the network on chain, you can almost get into a situation where each UTXO that is out there currently has a sort of like risk profile attached to it, where it's like, okay, well, the funds have a deep history with darknet markets, or these funds, seem to just come from exchanges, so they're kind of clean. You can take that information and attach it to Lightning itself. So every Lightning node opens up a channel between another Lightning node, and there's a UTXO that's locked up between those two channels. So because it's a UTXO, you can then assign a risk profile to that UTXO and come up with like, oh, okay, the channel between these two nodes, it looks like it came from very dark activity. So we're going to then assign the nodes themselves to a sort of risk profile itself. So whenever a user tries to withdraw from an exchange into one of these nodes, Chainalysis might come back to the exchange and say, hey, look, you may not want to approve this transaction because it's going to like a sort of dark node, or a node that's has some bad history attached to it. So I would say like that's probably the lowest hanging fruit of what's actually happening.
So just to recap, you're saying that if I receive Bitcoin or send Bitcoin to a dark market somewhere, let's say the Silk Road, hypothetically, and I use that same Bitcoin to create or fund a Lightning channel, you're saying that Chainalysis at the very basic level would identify that UTXO and be like, hey, look, that looks like it's a bad egg. That looks like it came from the dark market, and we see that it's an Lightning channel. Is that right?
Right, and yeah, and there's an aspect to here where it could be either party that UTXO belongs to too. So it's not even like a foolproof system. There's like a 50% chance that that I opened up that channel, or maybe with Andrew you opened up that channel. So it's almost an unfair assessment that is being criticized here, where it's like, okay, well, we don't really know. And then even with Lisa's dual funding feature that she added to See Lightning, it even adds more dynamic to it, where now it's like I could have opened up the channel, you could have opened up the channel, we both could have added funds to that channel, and now we have a UTXO that has both of our histories, some of our histories attached to it. So it's not a complete foolproof system, but you can almost get into a situation where like I'm a node with like 10 different channels, and let's say 95% of it is like dirty coins, then they'll go ahead and assume that my node in general is probably a dirty node. If there's only like 1 or 2 channels out of like 100 that are bad, then they may not hold that against me too much and say, okay, well, it could have been the other person that sent the funds. And then there's different ways to do chain analysis on UTXOs. Some of them work where it's like a percentage of the funds. What percentage of the funds came from a bad activity? And then they can kind of use that information to say whether or not that node is good or bad.
Yeah, any other thoughts on how somebody might try to surveil or monitor the Lightning Network and decrease its privacy?
So I think doing it kind of at a large scale to just know everything that's going on in the Lightning Network is very hard. If you're targeting like a specific individual, so I don't know how well this, or if this is the kind of thing chain analysis would be into, depending on kind of the scale that they're looking at. But say that like for one reason or another, some organization is interested in like a specific person's Lightning Network activity, then there's some much more kind of sophisticated stuff that they can do today on Lightning to try and figure out what your channel balances are, and when you make transactions and things like this. It's not necessarily inexpensive to do, but they can essentially spam you with fake payments to figure out, essentially like they create a fake payment, and you can't tell that it's fake because when you're routing a payment, you don't see anything about it other than like Lisa said, where it came from, where it's going, and the amount that you have to send to someone else and the amount you're getting from someone else. So say that Andrew, you have a channel open with Anthony, and you each have like 1 Bitcoin on each side of that channel. Then if I try to route through the 2 of you to Lisa with a fake payment, and say that it's for, or even to Andrew through Anthony, and say that it's for half a Bitcoin, then I'll get a payment failure that says like I wasn't able to complete this. But if I pay for like a Bitcoin and a half, then it'll say, then Anthony will just refuse, saying I can't route that amount because he only has a Bitcoin on his side. And so I can kind of keep doing these fake payments until I kind of narrow it down to how much Bitcoin is on Anthony's side of the channel and how much is on Andrew's. And that kind of gives you one snapshot. But then if I wait like say 30 seconds and then do it again, if that number has changed, then I can assume that a payment has happened. And then if I do this to a couple nearby channels as well, I can try and find out kind of where payments are flowing. And this is something, though, as I mentioned, though, like this would be not something feasible to do with the entire Lightning Network. This would be kind of more of a targeted attack to a neighborhood around, say, a specific person or a couple people on the Lightning Network. And it's also something that, like in the future, there will be protocol upgrades and other things that nodes can do to try to protect themselves from. But just speaking from like as Lightning is today's standpoint, channel probing is a thing that can happen and probably does to some extent.
Yeah, based off of that description, it sounds pretty expensive to execute. But yeah, Lisa, like, did you want to hop in there?
Yeah, I think all of what Anthony and Nadav has said is totally true and correct. And these are definitely some challenges with like tracking nodes or like figuring out what funds belong to which nodes and where payments are going and who's paying who. But like I mentioned earlier, if you are the one who's picking the route out, you know what the destination node is and you know what the origination node is, right? So my theory about this like KYT Know Your Transaction product that Chainalysis shipped. So I have like a little bit of a conspiracy theory about what's going on here.
Let's go. I want to hear it.
Yeah, okay. So my guess is that as an organization, they probably don't have a lot of signal or data about Lightning Network currently. They have all the information, like Anthony talked about earlier, about already know which UTXOs they think are kind of suspicious and can kind of already tie those to Lightning nodes and channels already. So like they kind of have that information. But that's not know your transaction, right? That's like know your node, which isn't the product they're selling. The product they're selling is know your transaction. So my guess is that what they're going to be doing is they're going to be taking invoices and sending invoices to them. And this will let them start collecting data about who's sending payments to who. So they might not actually know what route it takes, but they'll know who's transacting with who, and that's all that they care about. So really, by them shipping this product, let's say they don't have a lot of good data and they can kind of just give you a yes, no right now as a business. So let's say, I'm a big exchange like Coinbase and I send and receive payments over Lightning. My users that want to send money out are going to be creating invoices that are going to be getting invoices from people they want to pay and then sending them to me to build a route to send it to, right? So this, as soon as my customers are giving me the invoices, I turn around and I give that to Chainalysis. I say, hey, can I pay this node? Chainalysis then gets all this data about who's paying who over the network. They didn't have to do anything. They didn't have to do any of this fancy probing stuff. They didn't have to do anything really complicated with UTXO tracking. All they have to do is offer this service and ask their customers, which are the exchanges, to send them all this invoice data. And all of a sudden they have a pretty good idea of who's transacting with who over the Lightning Network. So I think the stuff that Anthony was talking about kind of having an idea about like who those nodes belong to suddenly becomes like kind of a bigger question too. So maybe they figure it out via what they know about the UTXO set already and all their other UTXO data based on KYC things. So their job is really, they're going to be trying to tie a node ID to a customer using the on-chain transactions, as well as any information that they use in terms of like submitting invoices. Maybe there's some way to use an invoice to figure out who those nodes belong to. And then they're going to be tracking all this invoice data. So in some ways, by shipping this product, even if like, let's say today it's not very good and they don't have a lot of information, it's really a way of getting their customers to pay them to collect a bunch of data about the Lightning Network, which in turn makes their product even better. So like, it's kind of one of those like Huckleberry Finn kind of things. And unfortunately, exchanges are very highly incentivized to pay Chainalysis to take their data. The reason for that has to do with compliance, is kind of what the industry is called. And that's that there's these series of rules and regulations. If you're a big regulated exchange that has permission from the government to operate, that you will do the best that you can to document where you're sending money to and where it's coming from. So it's kind of a cover. Like I did some business school stuff in undergrad, and at one point I was on a failing project. It was a software implementation thing. This was for like a software implementation course, whatever. And my professor gave us this great advice. It was like, guys, you're not going to be able to ship this thing. You should cover your ass in paper. So just produce as much documentation about the project that you're going to do, and like just like have like all this paper that makes it look like you did a really good job, even though like you didn't ship the system, whatever. But that's what we'll grade you on. It'll be fine. So like with compliance things, they cover like if you're a big exchange and you want to run a ship-shape compliance department, you want to have covered your ass in paper, so to speak, which means hiring a company like Chainalysis that will produce a lot of paperwork that says like, hey, we processed all these KYT, know your transaction stuff. So like, I guess I'm saying it's a little bit of security theater, but hiring Chainalysis to send your invoices to Chainalysis, and they'll send you back like a piece of paper that says green check mark or black X, right? Or like red X. You basically outsourced your like paperwork of compliance to Chainalysis. So you don't really care if it's good or not at this point. All you care is the paperwork they send back saying that like, oh, we did as much as we possibly could and are reasonably expected to around these Lightning transactions. So all that to say, it's like exchanges that are regulated and like centralized, have a lot of incentive to pay Chainalysis to take all their invoice data. So I think Chainalysis definitely knows that when they ship this product. Anyways, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that sounds like pretty invasive to implement from an exchange perspective. But on the other hand, maybe some of these exchanges will finally support Lightning withdrawals and deposits.
Yeah,
Anthony.
I love that, Lisa, that explanation of it, and that's probably a big aspect of it as well. Just to touch on like the invoice information specifically, like there's even like kind of damning information that chain analysis should probably not have and collect, like the descriptions of the invoice. You can put in an invoice why you're getting a payment. So I think we should all be a little bit more conscious of that. I wouldn't put like when I'm paying my friend, sometimes in the back of my mind, if I'm paying them on Venmo or something, in the back of my mind, I kind of wanted like for drugs or something stupid just to see what happens. But you have to be aware of that with invoices too. So like if I create an invoice and I say it's for like our casino night, and then I give that to my friend, I don't know where my friend's going to pay me from, but all of a sudden he uses his custodian that uses chain analysis, and then now my node is on record as being associated with gambling. But then also like routing hints are a big aspect as well. If I have a bunch of private channels, which are really just unannounced channels, are not as private as we all think they are. So if I think I'm protecting some of my channels and some of my UTXOs behind the channels, behind private ones, and then I give an invoice to my friend and he turns around and gives that to his custodian, which gives that to chain analysis. Chain analysis can build this sort of like private network graph that they are aggregating and that they know of and no one else does. So like I love that conspiracy theory, Lisa, and I think if they are doing that, it'd be really smart to collect invoice data.
Yeah, on that note, you guys have already been discussing this topic, but like, would it be helpful for us to dive into the differences between footprints of invoices and on-chain transactions? All right, yeah. Who wants to take a stab at it?
Yeah,
I
I
liked
think
Anthony's blog post about invoice data, so I think he should.
Yeah, some of the things with invoices, I said some of it, but one of it's like you have to reveal when you create an invoice, and I typically, like Lisa said, like I create an invoice and I will give it to Lisa or I give it to Andrew and I say, hey, pay me. That's typically how the flow works. I have to reveal my node public key, which you can then look up that public key on your own node or on something like 1ml.com or some other Lightning node explorer, and then you can view their UTXOs and their channels and all that information. They can view your like Tor address if you're using Tor, if you're using an IP address for your node. Hopefully like people aren't using their IP address of their home node or at their home, and then they can kind of see where the general area of where they live. They can look up like alias information too. So if I named my node something like, Bob123, for me, it doesn't make sense, but, because my name's not Bob. But if I give that invoice to you, then I just identified myself as Bob123. Or if I name my node Anthony Ronning, which would be really stupid, everyone on the network can see that. And they now associate it with this like node pub key. So a lot of information just from knowing the node pub key can be really revealing because of what you can look up after the fact. But there's also other information in the invoice, such as amount, description, like I said, the private routing hints, and then all of that's like signed by your node private key. So that's kind of the information that's revealed in typical invoices today. That could change in the future, hopefully, and that's a lot more private. But those are kind of my thoughts on invoices itself. I'll let anyone else take the on-chain footprint side of it if they want.
I can jump in here. I think Anthony made a really good point on like, I guess the on-chain side. I want to tie this. I'm going to say on-chain for Lightning kind of also goes to like your node ID, right? So like Anthony was saying, I think one of the biggest challenges in Lightning and like the thing that kind of protects your privacy more so than other things is like making it such that like no one knows what your node ID is. So maybe it's possible that like people can figure out what UTXOs belong to a node or what payments are going to a node, etc. But as long as like your personal identity isn't easily tied to your node ID, that saves you, I think, a lot of this privacy stuff that we're talking about. Now, I think we've already discussed a lot of ways that that's really complicated and difficult and hard to do, but it's kind of like the one way that you can sort of protect yourself as a node on Lightning right now from at least like people knowing who's operating with it, etc. I think that like that's kind of hard because like with the on-chain footprint of Lightning, like we haven't really talked too much about that, but I guess now seems like a great opportunity to. One of the problems with the current way that, I don't know if it's a problem, but one of the, like the leaky, privacy leaky things about the current on-chain Lightning way that it works is that when you make a channel, there's two types of channel. There's unannounced or private channels, as Anthony mentioned, but then there's also public channels, which are kind of ones that everyone knows about and can route through. When you make a public channel or an announced channel, you publish to everyone, kind of make public information about, hey, here's the UTXO, like here's the UTXO that created this channel, and here's where you can find it on the blockchain. And here's proof that these two nodes, because every channel has two nodes on it, here's proof that each of these nodes holds a key that belongs in this UTXO. So the UTXO itself, like, whatever, it doesn't really matter. Like the transactions that go through that UTXO are really ephemeral. You won't be able to see like the transaction data that's flowing through that UTXO, through that channel, just through the UTXO data. But the problem is that once you publish that UTXO, people can go look up that transaction on chain and see what other inputs came into it, what other outputs went to it, where that's all like associated to, etc. So doing coin joins before you create a Lightning transaction is a good practice because that helps separate this like on chain, being able to check, like trace whose transactions belong to who, to your node, so that kind of just reducing the certainty that that particular node belongs to a particular entity, I think is one of the best things you can do in terms of Lightning privacy. And this really, I think, applies to people that are running Lightning nodes and really care about keeping their transactions and it's not so transactions and just kind of like economic like activity private, right? To do.
Cool. Thanks for that summary. So it sounds like Lightning transactions right now can be considered maybe a little bit more private than on-chain transactions, but it's still difficult. If that's the case, one question I had for the panel is, how private could Lightning Network be in the future? And Nadav, I kind of want to kick this to you because you actually wrote a really cool article about integrating, I think it was Taproot or Schnorr with the Lightning Network.
Yeah, so there's a lot of cool kind of proposals floating out there that have good positive privacy impacts. One that I think you're referencing, or I guess it's a couple mixed into one, but with Taproot, now that we have Schnorr, and specifically easy kind of new signature stuff, math magic, if you will, we can do a couple things. One of the things we can do is we can try to make it so that the on-chain footprint of a Lightning channel is not as telling as it is right now. Right now, you can make a decent guess that a specific UTXO is a Lightning channel, even if it's unannounced, and learn a lot of information off of that. Whereas with Taproot in the future, using kind of key aggregation instead of having an output that says like, here are two parties that own these funds, which is kind of what a Lightning channel looks like. You can just say, here is a single public key that owns these funds. And so that'll look like most other outputs. So that'll help privacy quite a bit right off the bat. On top of that, new way of doing payments on the Lightning Network itself should be helpful against other kinds of privacy leaks. One of the things in that invoice is called the payment hash. And this is actually just a stamp of data, kind of a fingerprint, if you will, that is kind of the piece of data that when Lisa routes through me, then Anthony, then Andrew, I might not know anything about the route other than Lisa and Anthony existing on it. And I don't even know Lisa's the first, or that Andrew exists. But I do know, for example, if I talk to, say that there are more people on this route even, and say Bob is also on this route between Anthony and Andrew, I could go talk to Bob and we would both see the same fingerprint, this hash, and know that a payment went in kind of this direction. And so with the new Schnorr magic, we can get rid of that and essentially make it so that there's not this fingerprint that traces through the entire network along every payment that you route. What are some other fun things? There are, well, these kind of are already starting to exist, but I think they'll be cooler and more fun and have kind of better integration in the future. But multi-path payments, essentially taking your, if Lisa wants to pay Andrew, instead of taking her one Bitcoin and sending it through me, Anthony, and then to Andrew, which would be a pretty easy thing to track, right? You can see that a Bitcoin moved from Lisa's side of the channel to mine, from mine to Anthony's, and from Anthony's to Andrew. Even with just a little probing, that's such a big difference that you could see a big payment kind of rolled through, and you could kind of follow those big payments. In the future, those payments will kind of be split up. So Lisa could pay 10 different people 1 or 0.1 Bitcoin along 10 different routes that all reach Andrew in the end. And that would be much harder to kind of follow. And the Taproot version of this doesn't have kind of correlation between those different payments in the way that current things do. Another fun one is channel rebalancing. Once that becomes a little more automated, especially if something like just-in-time rebalancing happens, you can kind of shift your money around between your different channels kind of in real time as you're routing, which makes you much harder to kind of probe. And then I think Lisa can probably talk about this one more, but batching channel openings, I think, is a cool thing that's happening, if you want to talk about that.
Yeah, I can talk about it a little bit. I think like the idea with like channel batch, so like the reason you batch and open, right, is, well, there's two ways to kind of look at it, a batching. One form of batching is where I'm a single node. I want to open a channel to Nadav, Anthony, and Andrew, and I do all of that in the same transaction. This is a great idea because it saved me a little bit of money on chain fees, just like a little bit. It's not as big of savings as you think, but saves you a little bit of on-chain fee money, and then it makes it such that you can use less inputs or whatever. I don't think that's as good for privacy as you could get, but that's one example. Another example of batching is using the proposed, so in C Lightning, we've implemented something called dual funded channel opens, that actually does on-chain. So like I will have an input and then Dav could have an input. And these work, so on C Lightning, they work with multi-funded channel openings. So I could open a channel with Nadav, Anthony, and Andrew using C Lightning. We have to all be running C Lightning right now, though. And if all of you also put money into the channel, then we have one UTXO that's got money from me, from Nadav, from Anthony, and Andrew in it. So it's one UTXO with 4 different people in it, and it opens 3 different channels at the same time. Plus, you guys might also send change to other places, etc. So it's like a mini group coin join. So anyone who's watching this outside of our little group won't have a really good idea of what happened in this transaction because it's just like, whoa, what the heck? All these like two whatever's just happened. That's crazy. But I think one of the downsides is I have to tell my UTXO to Nadav, Anthony, and Andrew. So it's a little bit of like this group of people are people inside my circle, and it's cool because I'm making this channel relationship with them. I kind of already have a certain level of trust with them, and we're going to make it a lot harder from anyone else outside of our little group to like understand what's going on with our UTXO set. So that's like a valuable thing. I think the third way that kind of batching is happening is through services that are like more centralized, like Pool. Or I know of someone who's working on kind of a more way of kind of doing coin join transactions that involve like a centralized server. So it involves a centralized server to do some coordination. but you create kind of, I think it's one transaction. I could be wrong about that. But basically, a third party will take all the desires, my desire to open a channel, and Anthony's desire to open a channel, and Andrew's desire to open a channel. We send all these desires of our channel openings to a centralized party who then acts as a coordinator to build one big transaction to help all of our desires of opening a channel happen, and then publishes that to chain. So that's like also then the only people who know about your channels are this you and the centralized party that you've expressed your desire to open, a channel to. And the centralized party knows who all the other parties in that transaction are to some extent, depending on kind of like your communication protocol that you're using, etc. And then, a batch transaction happens with a bunch of stuff in it. With like varying levels of who knows what about that transaction, etc. But yeah, so there's kind of like, I think, a couple different ways that batching can happen, and they all have different trade-offs in terms of like information leakage, I think.
That is pretty sick. I think this is my first time ever hearing that. So that's like breaking news, at least from my perspective. Yeah, I'm not sure if somebody touched on this, but is there any benefits of Taproot and opening channels and closing channels, and how these transactions might look similar to other on-chain transactions?
Yeah, so I think I only briefly kind of touched on this, but essentially the goal with Taproot in Lightning is to have kind of all of your on-chain footprint look kind of indistinguishable, or as indistinguishable as possible from just kind of normal transaction activity, so that it's harder to look at a UTXO and say what kind of thing it is, if it's a Lightning channel, if it's some other kind of contract, if it's just a normal payment. All of those things are kind of going to look the same, and even when you close, in most cases, that will just look like another payment, because it's just a bunch of single public keys on chain is kind of what things will collapse into. So essentially, right now we utilize Bitcoin script in order to kind of execute kind of the channel and to have that contract be enforced by the blockchain. And that is kind of going to be, at least parts of it, offloaded into more of the kind of signature math. It's that it doesn't show up on chain, and only the kind of parties involved will have the metadata that they need in order to actually utilize the fact that like something more interesting than just a single pub key is actually what's right there. But it looks just like one, and so in the future, your Lightning channels opening and closing are going to look just like normal payments on chain, and are kind of still subject to kind of on-chain privacy concerns, but they're not like right now. If you look at a blockchain and someone just shows you a like transaction that's a 2 of 2 multi-sig with all the right kind of fingerprinting on it, then you can like guess with pretty good probability that that's a Lightning channel and try and figure out more about it.
Very cool. All right, so we have some questions from the audience, and so we're going to go into the lightning round. One question that came in was, some people are saying that the Lightning Network is not actually decentralized and therefore cancels out the principle of Bitcoin in the first place. What do you guys think in regards to that question or statement?
I kind of feel like, I think do they mean not really decentralized? Decentralized.
Yeah, I think they're probably thinking about how, major Lightning hubs and yeah, that's my
yeah. So this is like, I think this is a good question. I think it's also a little provocative in terms of when you start thinking about like how banking works and like centralization, etc. And like, I think it's a valid question to ask if Lightning as a system will end up looking more like traditional banking than like other stuff. And that's like a totally long thing that I could probably write a few blog posts about. So I'm not going to give you like that thing. I think what I think like, so when you get down to the benefit or like what is like a lightning channel like actually doing, right? It makes transacting between parties that transact together a lot cheaper. So lightning really shines as a protocol when you get relationships between parties that are sending payments like back and forth between themselves, or maybe there's like a circle or group of people that are all like, you know, sharing money all between each other, etc. How decentralized is that is a good question. I think that one way of making those sorts of relationships where you send and receive payments a bunch of times between two parties tends to be between yourself and something like an exchange or like a larger financial entity that is also processing a lot of transactions between a bunch of other people, right? So to some extent, just based on the way that Lightning works, the most efficient use of those money, that Bitcoin that you lock into a channel, is going to be one that gets a lot of use. And unfortunately, I think that tends to be larger players or people that are doing a lot more transacting on Lightning on between each other. However, that being said, the cool thing about Lightning is it's technology that makes it possible for anyone at almost any scale to set up this relationship between each other. So while, like, let's say Kraken and Gemini, I don't know if they support Lightning. This is just an example of two large entities who probably send money back and forth between each other a lot. Probably have would like make a big Lightning channel and send a lot of money back and forth. And then if you wanted to have access to a lot of other Lightning nodes, whatever, you would create a Lightning channel to one of them, because then they're big connected to other big people sending money back and forth. But if I had like a little community of friends and we all had a tendency to send money back and forth to each other, it would make sense for us to open a bunch of Lightning channels between each other. That way we can send money back and forth between ourselves. So is like our ability to open up this like little side group of channels decentralized? Well, you didn't need permission from a bank to set that up. You didn't have to, like, all you needed was Bitcoin and some software that runs Lightning. So I think from the perspective of like the tools and the capability to set up Lightning channels, I think that it is decentralized. And I think that it's also more important than being decentralized. I think it's accessible to some extent, you know, depending on like accessibility is like a complicated question. You get into like concept of like, well, you do need some Bitcoin, a certain amount of Bitcoin to open a Lightning channel, and you do need some technical know-how. So clearly this is not like just any schmo off the street can like go make themselves a participant in the Lightning network. However, it's like possible, and it's more possible than it's ever been, I think, to participate in a global settlement network than it ever has been before. So I think that's definitely a big important part of what I think makes Lightning still part of the Bitcoin ethos, even if like the particular centralization questions are like slightly different, just based on the way that the protocol works. I don't know.
Yeah, and I think also right now, to the best of my knowledge, all kind of routing algorithms and probably also if anyone's automating opening channels, the kinds of considerations are mostly to optimize kind of the cost and to minimize the fees and these kinds of things, and reliability and a couple other factors. But I could definitely see in the future people like say paying a premium in a sense and like prioritizing like privacy and not routing through major hubs and opening channels in other places, even if it's not like the most cost efficient thing to do, if they say configure their node to be more kind of privacy preserving, so to speak. But Lightning is still something of a toddler, so we're not quite there yet, as far as I know.
Got it. All right, we have a few other questions. The next one is, what are your thoughts on services like LN Router actively probing the distribution of funds within Lightning channels and even selling that information to other node operators?
I'm actually for it. The devil's advocate in me is like, well, this is kind of, you know, your channel balances are supposed to be kind of private to you, but as Nadav was kind of explaining channel balancing earlier, it is trivial to figure out. Okay, I'll send a 1 Bitcoin payment that didn't go through. but the 0.5 did. So that's his channel balance. I mean, I almost just consider channel balances at a certain point to almost be public because of how kind of easy it is to get that information. So I'm for them kind of doing the work in doing this, and it's you do have to lock up liquidity, but as far as it's concerned, like sending fake payments, like doing a probing, sending fake payments, that's a free action. Any failed payments don't cost anything to the sender to do. So like they'll lock up some liquidity, but they'll get that right back, and it'll still be in the channel, but they send the fake payment, well, it comes right back to them, so they can actively probe the network and sell that information to node operators. There's almost a certain point, exchanges will do this a lot too. They'll kind of probe the network just to kind of figure out if a payment is going to succeed or fail. So there's almost a UX concern here where it's like it benefits the exchange's users for them to kind of either actively probe or do a little bit of probing right before they actually send the payment in order to be sure, okay, because they have to go back to the user and say, okay, this is going to cost you 1,000 sats to route this payment. And they know that ahead of time because they do some active probing. So the devil's advocate in me is like, LN router probing and selling that information, sure, go for it, because it's all allowed right now by the network. And if we want that to change, we'll have to figure out a way around that.
Well, that's a hot take.
Hopefully we do want that to change. But yeah, it's definitely like there's lots of kind of options for things we can do to make probing harder or much harder. But as it stands right now, the Lightning Network just today, like two main things for improvement in my mind are like spamming resilience, and I guess that's related to this because, like Anthony said, essentially it's free to spam today. Like if you lock up a little bit of liquidity, you can use that to do quite a bit, and it won't cost you anything. And so definitely spam protection, which there are like 4 or 5 different proposals right now being mulled over by various groups of people. For how to prevent this, and they all have different trade-offs. So it's a lot of active research, and the best channel probers are probably the researchers, and they do the most of it. Lots of probing in that area. So hopefully this is something that definitely improves over time. But I agree with Anthony that as it stands today, you shouldn't think of it as being particularly difficult for someone to find out what your public channel balances are, especially if you're using just an out-of-the-box node and not doing something reckless. Then you should kind of consider those things to be at least somewhat public.
I have kind of a hot take based on what Anthony said. Let's
go.
Okay. So in order to run these probing attacks, you have to lock Bitcoin into a channel, right? And then you take that locked Bitcoin and you use it to send out payments, because every payment that originates, you have to have that equal amount of Bitcoin locked into a channel that you have control over, right? So I think that there's like an interesting kind of like result you can take from this, which is that it's more profitable for someone, it sounds like, to lock up Bitcoin and probe the network and use that locked up Bitcoin to probe the network to get information about routes than it is to lock that Bitcoin into something else that could pay you more money for being locked up elsewhere. So that if it was more profitable to have your Bitcoin locked up and doing routing for you on your behalf, working to route payments, then like the cost benefit analysis of doing a routing thing would actually make it like unprofitable. Like it wouldn't be a smart idea to be using your locked up Bitcoin to do probing if it could make more money elsewhere, right? So I really think that this probing problem is like downstream of use cases for locking Bitcoin up right now. So if we get more volume on the Lightning Network and like you can make more money using your Bitcoin to route payments for other people than you can through probing for routes, etc. I think that will kind of like, we'll see like a kind of a trade-off there on the like, why would you do routing if it's going to like cost, like the opportunity cost of locking up that Bitcoin and using it to probe it could be used on other things more profitably. I think it's like, well, maybe probing lets you use your other locked up Bitcoin more profitably so that there is like a cost benefit thing. I don't know. Anyways, I just think there's kind of this interesting idea about like it has to be locked up, and then what is the value of locked up Bitcoin?
And shameless self-plug, what I'm hearing is that you should lock up we should have more ways of using Bitcoin as collateral in contracts that yield money in order to increase the opportunity cost of probing. And certainly there's stuff like that being worked on out there. DLC's cough.
Yeah, and there's almost an aspect too, is as the network is, if it's more profitable to do this probing and then everyone's doing it, then routes are going to go up. The route fees are going to go up from the people that are not probing, and then there's almost this like kind of balance between, if this market dynamic were to exist, almost a balance between, well, I'm going to stop probing right now because fees are really high on like network and I can make more money probing, or sorry, letting routes flow, versus going back, oh, I'm not making that much right now, I'm just going to switch to probing and using that liquidity. So that's a really interesting market dynamic there.
Yeah, and outsourcing it to a service such as LN Router makes it such that, one person can do all the stuff and you pay them for them using their capital in that way so that you don't have to. I don't know. Anyways, I think there's definitely some interesting stuff there.
That's cool.
And I think that's definitely a cool consideration for a lot of just like making probing less of a thing. Though I would still say that like it's hard to beat the opportunity cost of the government coming in and shutting you down. So probably, it's still worth it to implement all these other kind of mitigations, because there will still be some attackers that have reasons to do probing and things like that.
There's also like competition, right? Like if another service sells the data, then they're going to be outbidding against each other, making it, less profitable for these services too. So lots of different factors for us to consider. All right, so we have a couple minutes left, and there's one question that came through that looked kind of fun. What are your thoughts on future of AI, artificial intelligence, to be used for balancing channels, setting fees, and running a node where it's a completely hands-off experience for somebody?
I think like, so on C Lightning, we've been hearing amazing things about our plugin called CL Boss. Totally gonna plug it, that people like put some money on your node, you run this plugin called CL Boss. It's your C Lightning boss. It like opens channels for you. It does routing using, I think like BitPay has a routing service. It'll like rebalance your channels. It keeps your liquidity going. So like the future of it, I think it already exists to some extent. I've seen people like doing a bunch of tweets from a couple different people on Raspberry Blitz, I think, just added C Lightning, and so now you can use CL Boss to help do your Raspberry Blitz thing, and people are like seem really excited about it. I'm working on adding accounting to C Lightning, so I think it's like TBD as to whether this is like actually a cost-effective way of deploying your capital, and like whether it's a net cost or a net benefit. Soon we will have data on this, so I'm excited and also a little terrified. People will stop using Lightning when they find out how much they're spending, but we're going to do it. We're going to pull the Band-Aid off. It's going to be great. Yeah, I also like, my favorite way of reading AI is not as artificial intelligence, but as automated intelligence. So I think that like automated intelligence coming to Lightning, it's going to be amazing, and it's going to be a game changer, and it's already kind of here for some C Lightning users.
Very cool. Yeah, and just to throw a different perspective out there, a few months ago, there was a Lightning pleb, Erin Malone. She wrote this fantastic article of how, she took, personal interest in running a Lightning node, channel rebalancing and all that stuff. And she was saying, she's talked to other engineers who try to automate things here and there, but like they weren't as profitable as she was. And so who knows, maybe automated systems are great if you want a hands-off experience, but maybe true profitability comes from like someone who really knows the network and really knows what's happening, and they've got a great intuition. Well, Lisa, Nadav, Anthony, thank you so much for hopping on this panel. Y'all are like great friends of mine, and so really pleasure. It was a huge pleasure just chatting with y'all, and hope you all have a great rest of the week and Happy New Year's.
Yeah, love chatting with you guys. See ya.
Bye.